Good morning and welcome to this presentation with Beijer Alma. My name is Sandra Nordlöf and I am an equity analyst here at ABG. And with us here today we have Henrik Perbeck, President and CEO of Beijer Alma. Welcome and feel free to begin your presentation.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here and see everybody live again. I would also like to take the opportunity to present our CFO, Johan Duvemark, who is here with me today. Due to the format of today, I will do most of the presentation, but if we have any more detailed questions, Johan will jump in on that as well. So, we have about 20 minutes. I will try and give you a short overview of the Beijer Alma Group. I will also go in a little bit more on our key subsidiaries. This is, where our business is happening, and very important if you follow Beijer Alma on the market quarter on quarter. Also, I would like to touch upon our acquisition strategy, and if we have time, maybe some words just on the recent developments in the latest quarter. So, Beijer Alma is an industrial listed group, and our concept is really to acquire and own long-term industrial companies, which have a growth potential for the long term. Our subsidiaries, which we also report to the market, currently are Lesjöfors, which is a global spring manufacturer, and Beijer Tech, which is industrial trading and manufacturing in various industrial niches, mainly on the Nordic market. However, I also want to point out that until a couple of weeks ago, our third subsidiary was Habia Cable, which we divested in October this year. So it's actually been quite a change for our group over the last year, which I will come into further during the presentation. So, very high level, Beijer Alma has been around since the 80s and on the market, stock market. We have a strong main owner, which is Anders Wall and family and foundations. And they hold 25% of the capital and more than the majority of the votes. But most of all, the institutional owners are the investor base, with more than 60% of the capital, typically Nordic mutual or pension funds, and some international, of course, as well. But I'm also very happy to say that we have 10,000 private investors that are very engaged, and we meet every year in Uppsala for a big event when we in our annual meeting. So you're all very welcome to become private investors as well. So Beijer Alma, our role is really to be an active owner of our companies. And for that, we believe in having a strong financial position so we can support them in their plans. And also a really long-term commitment to developing their business. And more specifically, we also work and support our companies with acquisitions. And we have on Beijer Alma level resources focused in particular on acquisitions. But fundamentally, it's a very decentralized governance model. We really believe in that the local companies have the empowerment to make their decisions. This goes not only in our relationship to our main subsidiaries, Lesjöfors and Beijer Tech, but also within these companies. They are in fact a group of companies. Being really the managing director of a spring company in somewhere in Asia or Europe you are really the MD managing your whole company. So this is really fundamental how we work. Acquisitions have always been a part of the group's strategy, but I will come back to a little bit later that we have tried to increase this over the last years. And just finally on this page, the split, Habia Cable used to be around 15% of our group. And now, since in the third quarter, without Habia, Beijer Tech is about 30% and Lesjöfors about 70% of our group. So over the years, here's the last decade, you can see a steady performance of growth. But what is most important for us is profitable growth, growing our profit base. So we've kept steady margins, as you can see on the blue line. Here you can also see what happened now when we divested Habia Cable. So despite of that, we're still up a little bit versus last year. We think we're operating on a healthy margin level, so we're really looking for more opportunities to grow with that range, but of course, always protecting our bottom line, which is the key value creation for our shareholders. It is a global group, of course, with an emphasis with the main part in the Nordics and Europe. This is actually including Habia. We will have a little bit less of Asia and a little bit more of the US when we update this for the next year. But main business Nordics, Europe, but also a good footprint in Asia and growing in North America. In terms of our customer base, the key point I want to make with this is actually it's very diversified. So you don't have to read everything that's on the left-hand side. But we are really exposed to a number of industrial segments out there. And this is what is the strength also. So we're not just versus one industrial sector. We have quite a footprint I will come into on the automotive aftermarket, meaning replacement parts, but not so much to the OEM. But rest of that, there is a wide range here. As you can see, it's anything from machinery to construction equipment to medical and quite a broad base. Some of them, telecom, defense, oil and gas, and nuclear, will be significantly less going forward because that was some of Habia's key segments. And typically, we have very long-term customer relations. We are manufacturing components, and they are putting into their final products, which could be machinery, which could be some kind of vehicle. And our customers are typically leading in their markets. So it's not, but some kind of correlation to the industrial cycle, certainly, but not specifically to individual end markets. And that's been really a strength during these last several years that has been indeed quite turbulent. In terms of sustainability, we are focusing in the 4 areas where we think is most important for our business model and where we really can have an impact. We have a very strong focus on business ethics and anti-corruption wherever we are working in the world. We have the highest standards in terms of how we deal with our customers and suppliers. Resources, we do use, of course, a lot of resources. It's mainly metals and electricity or energy. So we're working constantly to improve both of course, the energy efficiency, but also how we work in a more circular model with waste. And then, of course, climate impact, which has a lot to do with the energy mix and what we can impact. But we're also looking proactively to work with our suppliers on finding in the next horizon now with more, especially metals, is going to be a big question for the climate impact. And finally, and most importantly, wherever we have our operations, we have 50 factories around the world. There's a high focus on our employee safety and to make sure that we have highly motivated co-workers. A lot of our staff in the factories are highly skilled, so it's really important for us to create an environment where they stay with us for a long time, which they tend to do, which is great. So a few words on our 2 main subsidiaries, which is indeed important to understand if you're going to follow our group. So I start on the left with Lesjöfors, our global manufacturer of springs and also wire forms and flat strip components. Most of the business is what in the business areas you can see industrial segment, which is almost 80%. That is typically customized products where we together with our customer, we develop a new component for it can be during a month or up to a year to create a component that they put into their final product, and then we live together it can be for 5 years, it can be for 15 years, as long as that product is successful on the market. And as I said, it can be a piece of machinery, it can be a chainsaw, it can be some interior. There are springs everywhere. And actually the nature of a spring is that typically it's a very important little component that you want to have good quality, and if it breaks, it normally the functionality will break completely. So it's an interesting, small but important part of many products out there. So that's the main part, and this is really quite a global business. As I said, we're in the US, we're in Asia, and of course, strong footprint in Europe and Nordics. The other business area is actually something completely different from a business model point of view. It's called chassis springs, and it is actually what car replacement parts. When you think of a car spring or a suspension spring for a car, it's exactly that. But it's not sold to the manufacturer, only on what we call the free or independent aftermarket. And here we have a very strong market share in the European market, almost 50%. And it's thousands and thousands of different products that are kept on stock, distributed through our main warehouses in Europe in a couple of hours across Europe. So that is quite a unique market position that we have built up through the years, and it fits very well to our flexible production schedule because we're keeping stock of thousands and thousands of different articles across Europe. I should also mention here that we have or had 4 main distribution centers. It's Sweden, in Växjö, we have in the UK and in Germany, and our 4th distribution center was in Moscow, in Russia. So in the beginning of this year, we decided to ramp down that operation completely. And this is something that if you see looking at our numbers, you will have an impact for the year following that. Out of the chassis spring business area, the Russian market was about 15%. So, but overall, of the whole Beijer Alma, it's about 3%. But it still had, for this business area, it did have an impact indeed, both on the, of course, the top line, but also the bottom line, because the impact was very sudden when you suddenly overnight decide to, stop a business. So this is something we dealt with mainly in the second quarter, but of course we will see throughout the year the repercussions from that. So Lesjöfors is now one of the leading spring manufacturers in the world with a turnover of almost 4 billion Swedish kronor and a good profitability of around 16% in the on average last 12 months, and some 40 manufacturing sites around the world, and further some sales companies. So it's quite an impressive group of companies, and as I will come back to, we're adding new and more companies through acquisitions to the Lesjöfors group. So that's our main holding, of course. However, Beijer is also very interesting because Beijer came into our group some 12 years ago as mainly industrial trading, but over the years we have really tried to also move into more to manufacturing. Also various components, but also on the Nordic market, we act as agent for some of the world-leading suppliers of machinery and consumables for the Nordic industrial companies. But it's also a platform for acquisitions into new industrial niches. So here we have a little bit more open agenda in terms of what kind of companies we can bring into our group. And one niche that we went in recently, like 2 years ago, is building automation, where you create a solution for commercial buildings and advanced buildings such as hospitals for energy and air quality, for example. Another important part, one of the business areas of Beijer is fluid technology, where we have one of the leading traders in the Nordic market, and we're building on. We have fire hose production and the valves, etc. on top of that. So now Beijer has a turnover of 1.7 billion kronor, which is significantly more than a few years ago, and also a very healthy margin of around 11%. So those are our key, and I've also already touched a little bit on how we grow also through acquisition. So, and this has, as I said, it's always been a part of our main strategy to create profitable growth through Of course, in the daily business, its organic growth always comes first. We're supporting a lot our companies with making new investments into, it could be new machinery, it can be new facilities. But the acquisition part has been increasing in importance for us also, because we think we can really add value to the group this way. So what kind of companies are we looking for? Well, the types are typically, the first one is complementary or add-on acquisitions into Lesjöfors and Beijer. As I mentioned, in Lesjöfors, we can, if we acquire a company in a new market, it can be a geographical expansion, it could be the product dimension, or certain customer segments that we prioritize highly. And the same way in Beijer, for example, in the fluid technology area, we also add-on acquisitions. But as I mentioned, we also enter into brand new niches, that are companies that are a little bit too small to be a Beijer Alma holding from the start, maybe have a turnover of 350 or 200 million kroner, and they will come into Beijer, and they will grow there in the domains of Beijer meanwhile. And we are also looking for major portfolio acquisitions in the Nordic market, but our key activities are related to the complementary acquisitions. How do we find new companies? Well, we work a lot proactively through our local mansions. We have more than 50 companies around the world, and all our key employees are encouraged to come with good ideas. What could be a good complementary acquisition and come into our group? Of course, we also work with screening, and especially in the new areas, it is also we are getting a lot of proposals from brokers and in investment banks. So a couple of years ago, I said we wanted to remain around 50-50 between what is coming to us and what we're sort of finding ourselves, and I think this is almost exactly where we are now in that balance. And there are some pros and cons. If you acquire a company that has proposed by a broker, it's prepared for sale, so there's a more, in a way, more smooth process. Whereas if you have established a relationship with an owner, or maybe also the active management, it can take several years before you have an acquisition. But on the other hand, hopefully you have a bilateral discussion without any other competitors. What are we looking for? Well, we're always looking for high customer value, whether it's manufacturing or trading. It's really important that we can clearly see why the customer is prepared to pay for the product, so to say. We like when we see international opportunities and that we can support our companies with. Some kind of strong market position. Either it can be a region of Sweden where they're very strong, or it can also be a niche, global niche with strong market for. So some kind of, so that you're leading the development in your market, and not the least. And this comes back to what I said before: a very diversified customer and preferably supplier based. Especially the customer base is very important. We see many small companies that are very in the hands of one big customer or two, and we really want to make sure they have a stable base of good customers that to work and develop. So what have we done? Well, I think we have managed to increase this. If you look before 2018, we made about one acquisition per year. We got up a little bit the speed, and then we had some impact from the COVID in 2020. But since now we're progressing and actually adding significant value, both in terms of, this is the top line, of course, with our turnover, but most importantly, also our profit base is growing. I thought I would give you one example, which we thought was very exciting. We acquired in the US this summer John Evans' Son, which is the oldest spring manufacturer in the US. They made their first spring in 1850, and as a fun fact, Lesjöfors made their first spring in 1852. So it's actually 2 years older than Lesjöfors in itself. But that in itself is not so important. But it's an excellent company. We managed to meet in our contacts in the US. Came from, have been owned by a few families, and they really ticked a lot of boxes for us. But first of all, we do have an agenda to grow more in North America. We're very heavy in Europe, as you saw before. Also, they were very strong in one of our key customer segments, which is the medical technologies, where they're supplying springs. It was really the right kind of customer portfolio. And thirdly, they also brought some product technologies that we did not have in-house, a type of springs called constant force springs. And this is something also we hope to leverage more on the European markets. And we typically work a lot with cross-sales opportunities between our companies. When they come into our group, we want them to be able to sell the whole offering of Lesjöfors and vice versa, that we can take their technologies to our other companies and promote cross-sale. So with this, we have now doubled. We also made an acquisition in the US exactly a year ago. So we have now doubled our presence in the US for the last 11, 12 months, and we're becoming a significant player on the North American markets as well. So this is a good example of a add-on acquisition. Somewhat larger than our normal acquisitions. This is actually value-wise, it was about the same size as our Habia divestiture. So quite significant for our group. And finally, just a short comment. As I mentioned, we do own our companies for the long term. Habia we did own since 1985. Looking, however, are we really the best long-term owner? We thought Habia could develop further together with another industrial player in the cable business. So it was divested to HEW Cable. And of course, the key for us was really to create resources to support our two main tracks of investments, which are within Lesjöfors and also within Beijer Tech. So, and as I said, the sale of Habia was announced about the same time as the acquisition of John Evans' Son. So in a way, we made a kind of industrial capital reallocation over a couple of weeks this summer. So we really see more opportunities in these two areas where we're most active right now. So I think our time is running. I will just give you a very short comment on a high level. Where are we at right now? We can see, we do still see some growth in the industrial markets. It's not as bad as you read sometimes in media out there. It's good activity levels overall. It's varied, you could say. We have a couple of segments, such as the automotive aftermarket, which is a little bit slower, whereas Nordic, American industrial segments are still seeing a good demand picture. Asia, somewhat hampered in China of the what should we call the COVID situation there, which has subdued the demand somehow, but let's see how that develops. Of course, over the last year, we worked a lot with price increases and the cost. Initially, it was a lot driven by raw material. Now, recently, of course, it's more general inflation. So this is something that's on the highest of our agenda all the time to protect our margins. And after the John Evans' Son, we also acquired another spring manufacturer in Turkey, which is a very good company that we think will be an interesting expansion of our production platform, having a little bit closer low-cost production. So that's on a very high level. Now I think if I should give you a chance, then you should.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation, and maybe we do have some time for some questions. So let's just start off where we're at, more or less, with the inflation and cost increases. And you mentioned that you have been able to offset this with price increases. How does this look forward? What are your abilities to adjust prices moving forward, given that the cost base continues to increase?
Yeah, so one of the key drivers for us in the last, it's actually more than a year, it's been going on for almost 18 months, I would say, has been the raw material impact, of course, with metals, not the least. And this we have over the last year has been a very, how should we say, it's never easy, but it has been a very understandable to push on price increases if you are, in the industrial supply chain. So I think this was done already a year ago. We could start doing that, and we have done that. What is new now is, of course, more the general inflation, and I would say in general it's getting a little bit tougher. These are customers we've been working with for many years, and we have respect for each other. So it will continue, of course, based on inflation, but it's the period where the extreme fluctuation in the raw material is probably over, and we can see on the commodity markets it's going down, of course, already, and not quite on our type of steel, but it continues to be our focus, but I don't expect as drastic changes.
Okay. Thank you. Also, you have acquired John Evans' Sons in America, which is increasing your sales there significantly. How do you look at the American market looking forward? Is it very different from the European market, or how are your strategy?
That's a good question. We, as I mentioned, we have seen Nordic and US markets being the strongest over the last couple of months. I was actually in the US last week and talked to our colleagues a lot about this. And yes, I would say they don't see a strong downturn coming in the same way as maybe the sentiment is more in Europe, which we haven't actually seen such a strong downturn. But I think the US market is more of a classic. There, the inflation is really demand-driven. It's high activity. It's one of the key challenges is actually to find good, skilled labor for our companies and others. So I think it's a good activity level, and I'm not seeing such big, drastic changes in the U.S. market.
Okay. And continuing on the acquisitions, you mentioned that you have increased your number of acquisitions per year. What are the outlooks? You mentioned how you try to find the companies, but what is the pipeline right now and your plans looking forward?
I think the pipeline is absolutely decent. What we're doing is really to balance, in terms of what resources we have and what kind of companies we want to acquire. So of course, if we do run into a slower 2023, we're going to be very selective of what we acquire. But certainly our main strategic directions in finding good add-on acquisitions for Lesjöfors will remain, and also in Beijer Tech, if there is a new interesting area, we will definitely go in there. We have done, the two largest acquisitions in the group's history. We did within 12 months, actually in the summer of 21 and summer of 22. So in that sense, we have really added a lot to the group. But we will continue, and the pipeline is looking fine. But of course, we have to be careful. It's a lot of people. Companies are showing strong earnings from 2021, and you have to look on how are they going to perform over the next couple of years. So
yeah, okay, perfect. I think time is starting to run up. So we thank you very much for coming here, and also to everyone who listened. Thank you.
Thank you very much.